What is the true measure of a man? Is it contentment? Is it his ability to find peace and joy in all things? Is it humility? His ability to be humble with his work and his relationships? Or is it his character? Will he be a man of his word? Or is it his legacy? These would be conversations that I'd often have over the years with my grandfather. I called them the measure of a man conversation. He would remind me at times that the character of a man is often developed and revealed over time, not always in the moments that we want it most to revealed. As I've reflected on the life of my granddad this week and those conversations, it struck me that my granddad was the true measure of a man. A man that experienced much contentment in life, as expressed by many of you today. A man that was diligent with his work, but not consumed by it. A man that loved his friends deeply, cared for them, and those friends counted on my granddad. He loved his family dearly. He cherished his wife, and he served his church with gladness. He was one of my heroes. My name's Chris Walker, and I have the honor and privilege of being the firstborn grandson in the Walker family. I'll also take a lot of pride in that I share the initials with my granddad, being the fourth CWW, and the blessing of my son as a junior being the fifth CWW. So I realize not everybody's experience is like mine, but for many, grandparents represent all things good. Where the parent is the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Where the grandparent gets to spoil the child and then give them back to the parent for the bad and the ugly. Well, my granddad was all things good. He gave me my first shotgun to me and my cousin Daniel. He was there when I killed my first deer. He took me on my first turkey hunt in which I killed my first turkey. We spent a lot of cold mornings in the duck blind, which ironically is probably where I experienced the most discipline from my granddad. The bad from him I experienced was when I was doing something wrong in the duck hole. He taught me to drive a stick shift when I was 13 in South Texas. He loaned me his 1974 Ford Bronco as my first car that I had to get back pretty quickly. He was at all my sporting events. He knew my friends' names. He was a great granddad. He also didn't take himself too seriously. I have a memory when I was young, my brother was much younger and was at that age where he was talking a lot. And we were in my granddad's red Ford truck and he was trying to fix something. And he was frustrated and my brother was just talking, and he said, "Reynolds, stop talking, I'm trying to smell something." And I started giggling, my brother wasn't aware, and my granddad looked at me and just started laughing. He realized in that frustration what he'd said. And one of my favorite stories of my granddad is we did a lot of deer hunting in South Texas. And I think it was roughly 20 years ago, after dinner, my granddad and my dad got in an argument, which the Walker family is not a stranger to arguments. In fact, it may be our love language at times. But in this case, the argument escalated to a level that made me a little bit uncomfortable. As a 20-year-old, I decided to step out and I went and got in the truck and sat. Maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, my dad had gone to bed and my granddad came out looking for me. And he opened up the door and weeping, he got on his knees and said, "Son, please forgive me for the things I've said. I love your father, he's an amazing man. The words got the best of me and I want you to forgive me." I said, "Of course, Papaw." And we went on to have one of these measure of a man conversations, and he finished that conversation with saying, "At my funeral, I want to make sure that Job 19:25 is read. Will you make sure that that's the case?" And I said, "Of course, Job 19:25, Job 19:25. Got it, Papaw." So one attribute of my granddad that a lot of you know is his memory was amazing. He was so sharp with things that he could remember. At 75, he could tell you the name of the girl he sat next to in first grade and her dad's name and the street they lived on and who she married. And in his final years, he was starting to lose, his mind was failing him. And oftentimes it wasn't so much his mind, I think it was that he couldn't get the words to say that he actually couldn't remember. Well, I don't have such blessing. I do claim being the fourth, but I don't have such blessing. I couldn't remember Job 19:25. I guess it was about 3 or 4 years ago, me, my father, and Uncle Danny, and my granddad were on a fishing trip in South Louisiana. And one afternoon, while my dad and Uncle were breaking stuff and trying to fix it, we weren't fishing. Me and my granddad hung out for a couple hours, and we had our final measure of a man conversation. And I said, Papaw, do you remember that conversation in Texas some years ago? He said, I sure do. I said, well, I'm sorry, I know you mentioned Job, and I know it had a 9 in it, but I do not recall which verse that it was. I've been looking for it, I can't remember. Without missing a beat, my granddad said, of course I do. It's Job 19:25, and he recited it just as he did 18 years prior. It's amazing. He went on to quote many other scriptures that day. But you know, if my granddad was here today, what he would remind me and what he would remind you is that the true measure of a man is Christ. And that those attributes of my granddad were Christ manifested in him. His contentment, his humility, his character was Christ's character revealed in him over time. My granddad's legacy was Christ. That's what he left. In closing, I find it only fitting that he passed on July 4th. My granddad talked often about having he looked forward to that day, and July 4th being a day that as Americans we celebrate our home. And that was the day that my granddad got to celebrate his eternal home. Job 19:25. But as for me, I know that my Redeemer lives. In the end, he will stand up upon the earth. After my skin is destroyed, then in my flesh shall I see God, whom even I, shall see on my side. My eyes shall see, and not as a stranger. My heart is consumed within me.